Hello there, listeners to the Bylines Network podcast. We are recording this on St. George's Day, so what better subject to talk about than Scotland? I'm Julian in Bristol.
I'm Stella in Manchester.
And I'm Martin Roche in Glasgow.
Second part of our three-part series about the upcoming May elections. And as I hinted earlier, we are talking about Scotland. We are joined by the delightful Martin Roche. Martin, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
So I guess the big question, how screwed are Labour? Actually, better question, what was Labour's positioning in Scotland beforehand?
Well, I mean, Labour's position was very much as you would expect. It was a reflection very much of Labour across the UK. The problem Labour have had ever since the rise of the SNP, of course, is that the SNP stole Labour's clothes. So the SNP is essentially a social democratic party. But they just have that little bit more leverage with people. And of course, it's always been said in Scotland that the Scottish population vote for the SNP for Holyrood and for Labour for Westminster in order to get the best of both worlds. Because you've got an SNP government in Edinburgh, the London government is always afraid that that may lead to independence, and so they're a bit more generous to Scotland than they might be. But the policies that the SNP have had over the past now 18 years, of course, are very attractive in Scotland, particularly things like not paying for prescriptions and having no student fees. So Scottish students graduate from Scottish universities with no debt. So these are very attractive things, and that worries people about Labour in Scotland. But the general position for Labour in Scotland, of course, is that it's suffering in exactly the same way as is happening in England. Anas Sarwar, who's the leader of Scottish Labour, famously about 3 weeks ago called for the resignation of Keir Starmer. And Starmer has been in Scotland since then, but these two didn't meet. So it's not going to be a good night for Labour, I would think. If they come out neck and neck with Reform, then they'll think they've done okay. And if they're a little bit ahead of Reform, then I think they've done very well. All of the polls suggest that the SNP will be the biggest party, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. They will be the biggest party. Reform, of course, like so many other places, are the new kids on the block, but we'll maybe come to that. So it's a very worrying time for Labour.
I suppose on the SNP in the polling being assumed to get a majority, I saw on, was it More in Common? They said there was a potential that the SNP would have to create a coalition with the Greens. And I haven't done loads of reading about each party's positioning on this, but do you think the people of Scotland would be happy with that if the SNP were forced to create such a coalition? Because I guess if you have a coalition, most of the people haven't actually voted for the Greens.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, there are two distinct things, of course. The SNP are forecast to be the largest single party. There was a poll a few weeks ago which suggested they might get a majority. Most people think that's unlikely. That a majority that would allow them to govern entirely on their own without any support from other parties. But they did have a coalition with the Greens. Just before John Swinney became leader. And that all went wrong. And so that's why Swinney came out of what he was in semi-retirement and became First Minister. And it was a very tense relationship. Some of the Greens, the gender politics was pretty high on the public radar in Scotland around time, very febrile time. The Greens were great champions of the Gender Equality Act, but other issues with the Greens, I think the SNP found some of the proposals the Greens were trying to push forward just too expensive and wouldn't win public support. But of course, if it comes to it, they'll do a deal. Somebody will do a deal. I mean, you have to see Scottish politics in terms of for the union and against the union. So the parties against the union are the SNP and the Scottish Greens, and the parties for the union are Labour, the Lib Dems, and the Scottish Conservatives and Reform. And that looks like a fairly massive number of people, and it is quite a significant number of people. But the SNP in the past and Labour in the past have done deals with the Liberal Democrats. So, I mean, at the moment, the permutations are quite enormous. I mean, there's even the suggestion that it's possible, if the SNP they do well, but not well enough, that there's talk of Labour and Reform and possibly the Lib Dems getting together to squeeze SNP out of government. Now, that would be absolutely devastating for Labour, I think, in Scotland. I think it would be a massive error. I emailed a Labour MSP the other day there and asked his view, and he said, over my dead body. But you can never quite tell what will happen in politics. So lots and lots of... It looks as if it will be an SNP-run government with help from somebody else, I would think. The big change will be is that all of the polls are forecasting around 20 seats for Reform, roughly the same as Labour. The people who are in even bigger trouble than Labour, of course, are the Scottish Conservatives, who are in danger of being... the Lib Dems had 4 seats at Holyrood this time round, and they're hoping for... I mean, their leaders have been talking about 18. I think that may be a bit fanciful, but they could do well. They could get 10. And you could find that the Scottish Conservatives are down to a bit of a rump. If you take an area like Dumfries and Galloway, for example, the highly rural part of Scotland, traditionally extremely Conservative. Both the Westminster seats there are held by Conservatives, but you've got Reform and the Conservatives fighting for the right-wing vote. There's a possibility that the SNP could sneak through the middle of that, which would be quite fascinating. So it's far from a cut-and-dried election. I think the issue of who will govern Scotland is probably settled. I wouldn't put money on it necessarily, but all sorts of other things are moving, and of course there are a significant number of ministers whose seats might be in danger. The Greens expect to do well in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and quite a lot of SNP MSPs have retired. So that any strong local group vote for the individual isn't there in all those constituencies. So lots and lots to play for.
I guess the next big elephant in the room to address then, what does success look like for Reform? Because as you say so yourself, they're not, in every poll that I've seen, they are in no way, shape or form going to form any kind of powerful governments. Like they are like leagues away. So what would success look like for them this evening?
Well, success would look. I mean, if Reform do anything more than about 15 seats, they will say that's a very considerable success. And to be honest, coming from nothing, they've got one MSP who's a defector from the Conservatives, of course. So to move from one seat to 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 22, whatever, would be a tremendous achievement for them. Now, Reform in Scotland have a leader called Malcolm Offord, who was Lord Offord and was a Conservative. He was a city financier who made a significant donation to the Conservatives a few years ago and, strangely enough, became a junior minister in the Scottish office on the back of that and was given a peerage. But he defected just before the end of last year to Reform, saying he was giving up his peerage, and he is now the leader of Reform in Scotland, where Malcolm Farage is not particularly popular in Scotland. But it's Farage who's driving the vote here. Malcolm Offord is relatively new to politics, I think, and he's got a mixed performance on television. We'll see tonight, BBC Newsnight tonight comes from Aberdeen, with the leaders of all of the Scottish parties, except the SNP. John Swinney has stood down from that, and he's put one of his senior women in to speak for his party. He hasn't chickened out of any other hustings, so I don't think it's a question of he's scared of any of these people he's up against. He said, women should be heard and other people should be heard in my party. So she will speak for the SNP, and we'll see how Malcolm offered. There's Channel 4 had a Scottish leaders hustings a couple of weeks, 10 days ago. And I noticed that the Malcolm Offord was placed between a man called Roche Greer, who's the joint leader of the Scottish Greens, who's about 6'2", 6'3", and on the other side, a man called Russell Finlay, who's the leader of the Conservatives in Scotland, who's also about 6'2", and Malcolm Offord is much smaller, so it made Offord look rather odd in these long shots. But he did all right. He didn't embarrass himself. Nobody did. It wasn't. I mean, the election in Scotland hasn't really caught fire yet. People are. I mean, there's the BBC in Scotland reported tonight that there's a some academic is saying it has now caught fire, and that may well be right, and we're getting very close. And we know from studies of general elections everywhere that people tend not to make up their mind 2 weeks out. If they haven't made up their mind already, they haven't made up their mind 2 weeks out, and there appears to be a significant floating vote at the moment somewhere. Some people are saying around 40%. I think that's doubtful, but that's what they're saying. So you've got the thing that's setting it on fire isn't really manifesto issues and the promises that people are making. I think it's probably two things. One is Labour's trouble with Starmer and Peter Mandelson. It's engaging Scottish voters just as much as engaging voters elsewhere, and it's clearly damaging Labour's chances in Scotland, and as it will in the English local elections, and very much in Wales. So that's a big issue. The other big thing that's just now beginning to bubble through as a very significant issue with all sorts of ramifications, particularly in Scotland, is fuel. Fishermen and farmers are particularly complaining about the cost of fuel. I mean, if you want to fill up a fishing boat, the taxes are different, of course. You're not paying huge taxes that the citizen at the pump is, but it's still a very expensive exercise and can take half a tanker of diesel to do it. And of course, the other thing is, I don't think most of us realise, I certainly didn't realise, that the UK doesn't produce its own fertiliser anymore at all. It's all imported. There may be some small plants that do it, but to the best of my knowledge, as I'm told, and as I heard a farmer speak today, we don't. It comes from overseas. People are now complaining, saying we need to sort these things out in order to have food security in the UK. Now, of course, at Grangemouth in Scotland, last year we closed the only oil refinery in Scotland. I mean, this is bizarre. This is the only oil producing part of the UK, and we closed the only oil refinery. And of course, oil refineries and facilities that make fertiliser often go together, because you need lots and lots of energy and the power stations and all the rest of it. So that will reopen the debate. It also reopens the debate. Labour are championing nuclear energy, building nuclear stations in Scotland. The vast majority of Scottish voters really don't want nuclear. It's not that they're anti-nuclear, it's not that they're necessarily sort of pro-environment, it's just they find it very difficult to understand in a country that's producing vast amounts of extremely cheap renewable energy, why on earth would you want to build an enormously expensive nuclear power station with all the attendant dangers that come from it? It's a perfectly understandable question. I mean, there were, I think, at one point 5 nuclear power stations in Scotland. I think there's only 1 or 2 still operating, and they're coming to the end of their life cycle. And of course, the law in Scotland is that's a Scottish government function is to give planning consent for nuclear power. A Westminster government could change that, of course, but it would be a very politically contentious thing to do. But all of that comes into the central thing that the election's about. It'll be the same in England, the same in Wales. The cost of living is absolutely the top of everybody's agenda, and what can parties do to alleviate that? And to be honest, there's not a huge amount the Scottish government can do. They just don't have the powers. to do it. They can tinker at the edges. They can make things. I mean, I don't know if you know, of course, that the Scottish Government have been giving a far better social security deal to the poorest people in Scotland. It used to be that Scotland was either one in the first or second spot for poverty across the UK. It's now numbers 5 or 6 because of the SNP have made it slightly easier for people in poverty to feed their kids. So there are of course suggestions around what should be done, but none of them are really enormously strategic. And of course the big debate also is those who want to have more drilling and no production in the North Sea. So that's the SNP are on it's always a difficult issue for the SNP because they get a significant vote from people who are of a environmental cast of mind. But also they get significant votes from lots of people who say, look, that oil's out there, that gas is out there, why don't we use it? And the other thing the SNP dream of course, is in an independent Scotland, we want to have some of that stuff so that we can make our people richer quickly. So it has the whole war issue with Iran and with Trump has I think probably energised this election, which was on course to be rather dull. But there's not, as I say, there's not a huge amount any of these parties can do about it. Donald Trump, of course, is not particularly popular here. Again, it's much the same across the UK. He is, of course, popular with people who tend to vote for reform. So it's I guess the other thing, housing has been a big issue, as I'm sure it has been in England. The NHS in Scotland is run by the Scottish Government, and there are lots and lots of complaints about it. But there are complaints about the NHS everywhere. You're not. I mean, and of course, from reforms point of view, people fear that reform don't actually value the NHS as it is anyway, and that they would pretty swiftly privatise it. They wouldn't have the powers as the Scottish Government to do that, but you can see the direction things are moving in. One of the other big issues in Scotland, a great embarrassment to the SNP as well, are the issues of ferries. But the issue here is that there were two new, very important boats, were about 5 or 6 years behind, hundreds of millions of pounds over budget. Plus, the fleet was old, so lots of boats keep breaking down. And so serving these communities, these are vital lifelines to these communities in the Highlands and Islands, and also vital for tourism and for moving. If you take the island of Islay, for example, the island of Islay is the most productive part of the United Kingdom for tax. Would you believe it? There are now
How many people live there?
3,500.
Yeah, I can believe that.
No. There are 10 whisky distilleries on Islay.
Oh, I can really believe that.
Yeah. So I mean, it's per head delivery of tax to the UK Exchequer is enormous. But of course, they need the ferries to bring the grain in, to take the product out, and all that sort of stuff. And so that's been that's a great embarrassment to the SNP. If you had gone back 18 months, 2 years to the short reign of Anas Sarwar, who was not Anas Sarwar, Yusuf, who was the first minister after Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP would be on track to be wiped out, I would think, because he's a very decent man, very good man, but he just didn't have the political nous, I think. And of course, if you were still in with Nicola Sturgeon leaving, the SNP was in a pretty rocky place. Now, the SNP vote is likely to be substantially down from the previous Scottish general elections. So John Swinney has recovered the SNP. They were in a very bad way. Now, John Swinney was Nicola Sturgeon's number 2 for many years, very experienced individual, who was on his way to retirement. When she went, he said he would retire and he would see his time out at the Parliament. But once Yusuf had gone, he stepped into the gap. He was the stout party who came to rescue the SNP, and he's done, I think most people would say, an extremely good job in doing that. Partly because he's often seen as a bit dull. I don't think he's necessarily dull in private, but he comes across as a very Scottish sort of individual, the sort of individual who might be the treasurer of your local bowling club, or the captain of the golf club who served for many years and done 50 different jobs in the club, or an elder of the Church of Scotland, highly respected, honest, decent, pleasant family man, but sharp. He's an Edinburgh politics graduate, and he's been around politics a long time now, handles himself extremely well on television and on Question Time at Holyrood. And if it were not for John Swinney, I think the SNP would be heading for a significant defeat, but they're not. So these. I think the more interesting time isn't probably not the election; it's probably after the election. It's probably when we just see how they do. There's a number of significant people standing from the SNP side, standing for Holyrood, who may or may not get in. Among them is a man called Stephen Gethins, who's the MP for Dundee seat, Dundee and Angus. Stephen's a professor of international relations at St Andrews, but he's an MP at Westminster. Very capable man. Alan Smith, who's a former Westminster MP and a former European MP, is standing in Stirling, his home territory. Again, very capable chap. So, you've got people of that stature, and they may not win, which would be a big blow. I mean, there won't be particularly blows to them financially or anything, but a big blow to the SNP if they don't get people of that calibre into the Parliament. It could be difficult. But I think if they're in, if you get people like that, and some of the ministers who obviously be reappointed who are still who will win their seats, if you get people of that calibre, now that will be a very strong SNP government, very, very capable of presenting itself effectively to the public. So you could see, now one of the things John Swinney has promised is a second referendum on independence.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask. But I read somewhere a couple of weeks ago, he said something that I'm pretty sure every single SNP leader has said, that this next election is going to be effectively a referendum on independence. Now, in the politest way I can possibly put this, do people in Scotland actually care about independence right now, given all the issues that everyone in the country, not just Scotland, is facing?
About 40% of the people of Scotland care deeply about the issue, and probably another 20% care quite a lot about it. If you had a referendum tomorrow, I mean, recent events may have slightly changed things. We don't know. There hasn't been any decent polling on it recently, or deep polling on it recently. But if you'd had a referendum a year ago, it would have been won. The yes side would have won, because independence side has been running about 50% for the last 3 or 4 years. And if you start off from a base of 50%, you're going to win if you get a referendum. Now, so a very significant number of people do, and of course the very significant number of people do. There are also a very significant number, probably another 20 to 30%, who care deeply about the union. So they care as well. So you've got these two tribes. Reform being in the mix will clearly change the debate, because it's a fiercely unionist party. Swinney has lined it up quite neatly. If he happens to get an absolute majority, which we doubt, but if he happens to get an absolute majority, he will be compelled to say to Starmer, we're going to have, because it's not in John Swinney's gift. It's something called Section 30, which has to have the approval of Westminster, essentially the Prime Minister of the day. Now, all of the Labour ministers in London are saying no chance. But if the democratic will of the Scottish people is that the SNP are the largest single party by miles, by a majority, then it's very difficult for Starmer to stand against it. You're just saying to the Scottish people, we don't care how about your democracy. You're stuck with us. But certainly when it's always put forward as a voluntary union. And of course, the voluntary union is a bit like people often say, it's a bit like the Eagles song. It's like the Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. So it's but it's not anywhere on the current horizon, and it's not It's not filling people's minds at the moment, the independence issue at all. And and as Swinney again has been very careful with his words, even with an outright majority, I think he'd be very cautious to rush into. The pressure, of course, will come from his party, but from his grassroots members. But he'll be very cautious as well, because he's as aware as anybody else of the bigger geopolitical picture, which is also a picture that affects Scotland in a way that it doesn't affect England quite so clearly. I mean, Scotland is, in the prominent position in the North Atlantic, what used to be called the Western approaches. Scotland is the nearest country to Iceland. It's the nearest country to Russia. Scotland is also the home of the entire UK nuclear deterrence. That will change soon. There'll be some nuclear bombs going onto airfields in England. But at the moment, all of the nuclear deterrence in the UK is in Scotland, so about 15 miles from where I sit at the moment. It's a massive, very grave concern to Scotland, because one nuclear weapon would wipe out most of central Scotland. So these are very tricky times. But it's also simple, much more everyday issues of cost of fuel, cost of living, cost of food, etc. But as we've detected all over the world, Scots are no different. People are nervous, they're scared, they're worried, they think about their children's future. Consequently, of course, huge numbers of people, even highly educated people, are switching off. They're not turning on the radios and the television sets and going to their iPhones for news in the same way as they were. Because this is a huge psychological moment in the world. It's a moment that none of us have ever known before, and it's never happened in history before. You've got what, I think most of us would happen to describe as a rogue American president who is using every power he's got. And we don't know from one minute to the next how he's going to use those powers. So people are deeply, deeply concerned about how the future pans out. And that, clearly will have an electoral impact. But at the moment, it's not on fire. It's plodding along. Energy is becoming a bigger issue. I think the SNP will be pressed to say whether they will press the button on more exploration, more production. One of the interesting things about this, of course, is that during the Scottish referendum debate in 2014, I wasn't living in Scotland at the time, but I came to report on it, is that the Scots were told that the oil's running out very, very quickly. They were also told, of course, the only way to stay in the EU was to stay in the UK, which turned out to be a load of old baloney, as did the oil story, because they're now saying there's at least 40 to 50 years of oil in the North Sea. So who do we believe in these circumstances? Quite a lot of Scots began to think, well, we didn't get anything out of it the last time. We got completely stuffed. Nothing happened. There was no investment to speak of in Scotland as a result of this oil. Maybe we should make sure, and then that's one of Swinney's argument about renewables, because I don't know if you've been in Scotland recently, but windmills are everywhere. And they're even in some of the most beautiful parts of the country, and that's important because that's part of heritage and it's part of tourism. But his argument is that we are basically generating this stuff very cheaply to send to England, and we're getting charged more for it than the south of England because of transmission charges. So all these arguments are there, but there's not. It's not setting the heather on fire, I think, would be the answer to that. I think bad night for Labour, good night for Reform, terrible night for the Scottish Conservatives, a reasonable night for the SNP, and the Greens would be happy if they doubled their seat total, as would the Lib Dems.
Yeah, I guess we'll see in the post if should write down your prediction. Maybe it will all blow up.
I mean, on the bigger picture, of course, if Labour do as badly as they're predicted to do, and that happens, of course, if they lose Wales, I know I did a lot of work in Wales many years ago, and I know the valleys extremely well. I know Welsh politics well. To lose Wales just would be absolutely incredible, quite incredible, and the same as it was seismically when they lost Scotland to the SNP 18 months ago. These are Labour's heartlands. This is the very soul of the Labour Party was in Scotland and in Wales. So that and then we'll have to see how they do in these in the English local elections. So it may not be Peter Mandelson that sees Keir Starmer out of the door. It'll be these results, I think. And I actually don't think the Scottish result will have a great deal of impact on it because they're expecting to do badly and have done for some time. It'll be Wales and the English councils that will see that. But there's certainly going to be huge pressure on Starmer because now this is 2026. What now is it about? Is it 2.5 years to the next election?
It's just over 3 at the very latest.
At the very latest, it's over 3, which is no time at all. No time at all. So the pressure will mount on them. It'll be interesting to see what happens around your area, Stella. Again, a great Labour heartland. Labour have been, I think Labour control all of the councils around you, apart from one that the Lib Dems have.
Yeah.
If they were to lose significantly there, that would be a big blow.
London's also very interesting because at the moment there are 56 Labour MPs in London, and the councils in most of those places are in trouble, to say the least. But yeah, the councils in all those MPs' backyards are slated to go to either the Greens or Reform. It's funny how we've talked about 2 different countries, but the story seems to be the same.
The story's the same, I think. Yeah.
Starmer's in trouble, Reform are on the rise, and the Green Party seem to be doing quite well as well.
Don't forget the Conservatives are in deep trouble as well.
I know, but that goes without saying, and it might be like the one bright spark.
This is a very recent phenomena. If you go back 2 years, the Conservatives were still a force in the land, and they weren't much of a force in Scotland. But they were the second biggest party at Holyrood for most of this Parliament. So this is a big blow to them. So you are seeing this realignment of politics, which will take some time to come through them. You don't have a London mayoral. There's no London mayoral election this year, I think, is there? That's a separate thing. But other English elections will come up, and the Scottish local elections will come up, etc. So there are other opportunities for it. The big thing about is whether Reform can sustain the position that they're getting, can sustain the momentum. If the war in Iran with Iran stops and we get an economic boost, that could transform the fortunes of Starmer in Westminster. But at the moment, that was highly uncertain. But you're not sure. I mean, Reform. The thing about Reform is there some psephologists are saying that they've peaked already. Now we'll just have to wait and see in the course of the next couple of weeks exactly if that's true or not. But I would be surprised, to be honest. I mean, what's happening in Scotland is not Malcolm Offord that's getting the Reform, but it's Nigel Farage. Even though he's disliked in Scotland, those who like him are supporting him, and they're supporting his party here. So this is an important set of elections, really, as a guide to the future, not so much as if Reform take councils in England, you'll see the same sort of chaos I think you saw in Kent and Leicestershire, but they're settling down and they're beginning to understand how you do it. And once they've done that, they could become quite an important force. They could be like old-fashioned Tories. 50, 60 years ago, that's how Tories behaved. They didn't spend money, and that's how they get re-elected. It's as simple as that. Anyway, it's been very enjoyable to speak to you.
Thanks very much, Martin.
I hope it's
been lovely to speak to you too.
Illuminated Scotland a little.
Yes, thank you very much, Martin. And
Take care.
Thank you very much for joining us, listeners. I've been Julian in Bristol.
I've been Stella in Manchester.
And I've been Martin in Glasgow.